The morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills of eastern New Mexico, where the high desert meets the remnants of ancient Apache territory. Sarah Begay adjusted her hiking boots one final time before stepping onto the narrow trail that wound down into Pecos Canyon. At 24, she had inherited her grandmother's deep connection to this land, where her Apache ancestors had once traveled freely across what are now state lines. Sarah worked as a cultural liaison for the nearby Mescalero Apache Reservation, documenting traditional sites and stories that risked being lost forever. Today's mission was personal. She was searching for the exact location where her great-grandmother had described a hidden spring, a place of healing mentioned in family stories passed down through generations. The weather forecast had mentioned possible afternoon thunderstorms, but Sarah was confident she could complete her documentation and return before any serious weather arrived. She carried her camera, notebook, and GPS device, along with enough water for what should have been a 4-hour round trip. Miles away, James Morrison was mending a fence on his struggling cattle ranch. At 38, he had been running the 2,000-acre property alone since his father's death 3 years ago. The isolation had become his companion some days. He barely spoke to another human being, except for the weekly trips to town for supplies. James had inherited more than just land from his father. He had also inherited the mounting debts and the constant worry about keeping the ranch afloat. The drought of the past 2 summers had been particularly harsh, and he was down to his last 40 head of cattle. His nearest neighbor was 12 miles away, and the main road was a 20-minute drive through rough terrain. As Sarah descended deeper into the canyon, she noticed the sky beginning to darken faster than expected. The walls of the canyon rose nearly 200 feet on either side, carved by centuries of flash floods during the region's violent thunderstorms. The geology here was treacherous layers of sandstone and shale that could become slick and unstable with even minimal rainfall. She paused to check her phone, but as expected, there was no signal this deep in the canyon. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant call of a red-tailed hawk circling overhead. Sarah pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency she couldn't quite explain. Her grandmother had always said that the land would call to you when you needed to find something important. James was loading hay bales into his truck when he noticed the wall of dark clouds building on the horizon. Living in this part of New Mexico had taught him to read the sky like a book, and what he saw made his stomach tighten with concern. The towering cumulonimbus clouds were the kind that brought flash floods, violent, sudden, and deadly in the narrow canyons that crisscrossed the region. He had grown up hearing stories of hikers and photographers who had been caught in these canyons during flash floods. The water could rise 15 feet in minutes, turning a peaceful trail into a raging torrent. James quickly secured his equipment and headed for the house, planning to monitor the weather radio and perhaps take a drive to check on his cattle. In the lower pastures, as the first drops of rain began to fall, Sarah finally found what she was looking for. Tucked into a narrow alcove in the canyon wall was a small spring, just as her great-grandmother had described. The water bubbled up from deep underground, creating a small pool surrounded by ancient petroglyphs that had been carved into the rock face generations ago. Sarah's heart raced as she recognized some of the symbols from her grandmother's stories. She quickly began photographing and documenting the site, losing track of time as she worked. The sound of thunder echoed off the canyon walls, but she was so focused on her discovery that she didn't notice how quickly the storm was approaching. The rain began in earnest just as Sarah finished her documentation. What started as scattered drops quickly became a steady downpour, and she realized with growing alarm that she needed to leave immediately. The canyon floor, which had been dry red dirt an hour ago, was already showing signs of moisture as the rain began to collect and funnel down from the surrounding mesa. James had just tuned into the weather radio when the emergency alert came through. Flash flood warning for southeastern New Mexico, including the Pecos Canyon area. Seek higher ground immediately. Do not attempt to cross flooded areas. His blood ran cold as he thought about anyone who might be caught in that canyon system during a storm like this. Without really knowing why, James grabbed his rope, first aid kit, and a powerful flashlight before jumping into his pickup truck. He had a strange feeling that someone might need help, and his father had always taught him that in country this remote, neighbors looked out for each other, even if you'd never met them. As Sarah began her climb out of the canyon, she could hear the ominous sound of rushing water echoing off the walls behind her. The rain was coming down harder now, and the rocky trail had become treacherous. She was still over a mile from the canyon rim when she saw the wall of water rounding the bend. Below her, the flash flood was everything she had been warned about, a churning, debris-filled torrent that rose with terrifying speed. Sarah scrambled up the canyon wall, finding handholds in the rocky face as the water surged past where she had been standing just moments before. She managed to reach a narrow ledge, about 20 feet above the new water level, but she was trapped. The rain continued to fall, and Sarah realized with growing horror that the ledge she was on was crumbling. The sandstone was soft, and the constant moisture was causing it to erode beneath her feet. She had no cell service, no way to call for help, and no clear path to safety. The water showed no signs of receding, and darkness was beginning to fall. James arrived at the canyon overlook just as the worst of the storm was passing. His headlights cut through the remaining rain as he scanned the area for any signs of vehicles or people. That's when he saw a small blue Honda Civic parked at the trailhead, its owner nowhere to be seen. "Someone's down there," he said aloud, his voice barely audible over the sound of rushing water far below. Without hesitation, James grabbed his gear and began the treacherous descent into the canyon. Following the flood-carved trail by the beam of his flashlight, the water was still high and dangerous. But James knew these canyons. He had explored them as a boy with his father, learning to read the rock formations and understand the patterns of flash floods. If someone was trapped down there, they would need help soon, and he might be the only person who knew they were missing. The rescue James made his way carefully down the slippery canyon trail, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness and mist. The sound of rushing water grew louder with each step, and he could see the debris line on the canyon walls, showing how high the flood had risen. Tree branches, tumbleweeds, and rocks were scattered along the path, evidence of the water's violent passage. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Is anyone down here?" Above him, Sarah heard the distant shout and felt a surge of desperate hope. She tried to call back, but her voice was hoarse from the cold and fear. The narrow ledge beneath her feet had continued to crumble, and she was now clinging to in the rock face, her muscles burning with the effort of holding her position. James continued his descent, pausing every few yards to call out and listen for a response. The water level was slowly dropping, but it was still too high and fast-moving to cross safely. He knew that anyone caught in the initial flood would have tried to climb to higher ground, so he focused his search on the canyon walls rather than the floor. Help! Sarah finally managed to call out, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "I'm here, up here." James immediately turned his flashlight toward the sound and spotted her about 50 yards ahead, clinging to the rocky wall like a spider. Even from a distance, he could see that she was in serious trouble. The ledge she was on was narrow and unstable, and she was clearly exhausted from holding her position. "I see you," James called back. "Hold on, I'm coming to get you." He quickly assessed the situation as he approached. The water was still running too high and fast for him to wade across directly below her position, but there was a section, about 30 yards upstream, where the canyon narrowed and some large boulders created a natural bridge. If he could get across there, he might be able to reach her from the other side. "What's your name?" James shouted. As he began working his way toward the crossing point, "Sarah," she called back. "Sarah Begay. I'm James Morrison. I'm going to get you down from there, but I need you to hold on for a few more minutes while I get into position." Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure he could see her in the darkness. Her arms were shaking with fatigue, and she could feel the rock face becoming more unstable as the water continued to erode its base. She tried to find a more secure position, but every movement seemed to cause more of the ledge to crumble away. James reached the narrow section of the canyon and began his crossing, using his rope to secure himself to the larger boulders. As he worked his way across the rushing water, the current was still strong enough to sweep him away if he slipped. But he had crossed streams and rivers his entire life, and he moved with the confidence of someone who understood the water's power. Once across, he worked his way back downstream to a position almost directly across from Sarah. The gap between them was about 20 feet horizontally, but she was clinging to the wall about 15 feet above his position. He could see that she was in immediate danger. The section of wall she was on was clearly unstable and could give way at any moment. "Sarah, I need you to listen to me carefully," James called out, his voice calm and steady, despite the urgency of the situation. "I'm going to throw you a rope. When you catch it, I want you to tie it around your waist with a bowline knot. Do you know how to tie a bowline?" Sarah shook her head, her voice barely carrying over the sound of the water. "No, I don't know how." "That's okay. Just wrap it around your waist 3 times and tie it as tight as you can with whatever knot you know. The most important thing is that it won't slip." James pulled out his climbing rope and quickly tied one end to a sturdy juniper tree. that was growing out of a crack in the canyon wall. He coiled the other end carefully and prepared to throw it across the gap. He would only get 1 or 2 chances before Sarah's strength gave out completely. I'm going to throw it now. Are you ready? Sarah managed to free one hand long enough to signal that she was ready. James threw the rope with practiced accuracy, and it landed within her reach. She grabbed it desperately, nearly losing her grip on the wall in the process. Working with shaking hands, Sarah managed to wrap the rope around her waist and tie it off. It wasn't pretty, but it was secure. She tested it gently and felt the rope take some of her weight. Good, James called out. Now, I need you to trust me. I'm going to lower you down to the water level, and then I'll swing you across to this side. The water is still moving fast, but it's not as deep as it was. You might get wet, but you'll be safe. Sarah looked down at the churning water below and felt a wave of panic. I can't. I'm afraid of the water. Sarah, look at me. James's voice was firm but kind. I know you're scared, but that wall is going to give way any minute. I've done this before, and I promise I will get you to safety. But you have to trust me and do exactly what I say. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about her grandmother, who had always told her that the spirits of their ancestors would protect those who showed courage in the face of danger. When she opened her eyes, she looked directly at James and nodded. I trust you, James. Began to lower her carefully, controlling the rope with a belay device he had attached to the tree. Sarah tried to keep her feet against the wall to prevent spinning, but the rock face was too unstable. Pieces of sandstone broke away with each step, falling into the water below. When Sarah reached the water level, James called out, Now I'm going to pull you across. Keep your feet up and let the rope carry you. The crossing was terrifying but brief. Sarah felt the cold water swirl around her legs as James pulled her through the current. But within moments, she was on the other side, safe on solid ground. She collapsed to her knees, shaking from cold exhaustion, and relief. James was beside her immediately, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders and checking her for injuries. Are you hurt? Can you move your arms and legs? Sarah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it was barely a whisper. Thank you. You saved my life. We're not out of here yet, James said gently. Can you walk? We need to get you warm and dry, and we need to get out of this canyon before the water rises again. Sarah tested her legs and found that although she was shaky, she could walk. James helped her to her feet and gathered his rope and equipment. The climb out of the canyon would be challenging, but the immediate danger was over. As they began their slow ascent, Sarah couldn't help but steal glances at the man who had risked his life to save her. Even in the darkness, she could see that he was tall and lean, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of a life spent outdoors. His movements were confident and sure, and his voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to handling emergencies. How did you know I was down here? She asked as they climbed. I saw your car at the trailhead, James replied. When the flood warning came through, I had a feeling someone might be in trouble. I've lived in this area my whole life, and I know how dangerous these canyons can be during storms. They climbed in companionable silence for a while, both focused on the treacherous path ahead. Sarah found herself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. Her decision to come to the canyon, the storm that had trapped her, and the appearance of this stranger who had risked everything to help her. By the time they reached the canyon rim, the storm had passed completely, and stars were beginning to appear in the clearing sky. Sarah's car was still there, but it was clear that she was in no condition to drive. She was exhausted, cold, and still shaking from the ordeal. My ranch is about 15 minutes from here, James said. You should come there to warm up and rest, before you try to drive anywhere. I'll call someone to let them know you're safe. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She realized that she didn't want to be alone right now, and there was something about this man that made her feel safe. Thank you. I'd like that. As they drove toward James's ranch, Sarah gazed out at the landscape that had nearly claimed her life. In the distance, she could see the lights of the small town where she had grown up, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the second chance she had been given. But more than that, she felt a curiosity about the man sitting beside her, the lonely rancher, who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life. Unexpected connections. James's ranch house was a modest 2-story structure, built from local stone and weathered wood, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings that spoke of generations of hard work. As they pulled up to the house, Sarah could see warm light spilling from the windows, and she felt a sense of comfort she hadn't expected. It's not much, James said, as he helped her out of the truck, but it's warm and dry. Inside, the house was surprisingly welcoming. The living room featured a large stone fireplace, comfortable leather furniture, and walls lined with bookshelves and family photographs. Sarah noticed several pictures of what appeared to be James with an older man who shared his features, probably his father. "Sit by the fire," James said, already moving to stoke the flames. "I'll get you some dry clothes and something hot to drink." While James was upstairs, Sarah looked around the room more carefully. The books on the shelves were an eclectic mix ranching manuals, classic literature, history, and biography. On the mantelpiece, she noticed a small collection of Native American pottery and jewelry, pieces that showed real knowledge and appreciation, rather than tourist trinkets. James returned with a clean flannel shirt and a pair of sweatpants. "The bathroom is down the hall if you want to change. These will be too big, but they're warm and dry." When Sarah emerged from the bathroom, she found James in the kitchen, heating soup on the stove. The flannel shirt hung loose on her frame, and she had to roll up the sleeves and pant legs. But she felt human again, for the first time since the ordeal began. "Better?" James asked, ladling the soup into bowls. "Much better, thank you." Sarah accepted the bowl gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma of what tasted like homemade vegetable beef soup. "Did you make this?" James nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "I've gotten pretty good at cooking for myself over the years. Living alone, you learn to take care of yourself, or you don't eat very well." They sat at the kitchen table, and Sarah found herself studying James's face in the warm light. He was probably in his late 30s, with brown hair that was beginning to show some gray at the temples, and blue eyes that seemed to hold both kindness and sadness. His hands were those of a working man, calloused and scarred from years of ranch work. "I owe you an explanation," Sarah said finally, "about why I was in the canyon." "You don't owe me anything," James replied, "but I'm curious. It's not exactly prime hiking weather." Sarah told him about her work with the reservation, her search for her great-grandmother's spring, and the discovery she had made just before the flood. As she spoke, she noticed that James listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about her family history and the significance of the site. "So, you're Apache?" James asked. "Mescalero, Apache, yes. My grandmother was born on the reservation, but she married my grandfather and moved to town. She always said that the old places would call to you when you needed to find them." Sarah paused, stirring her soup thoughtfully. "I guess she was right. My father always said something similar," James said, "that the land would teach you what you needed to know if you paid attention. He wasn't Native American, but he had tremendous respect for the people who lived here before us." Sarah gestured toward the pottery on the mantelpiece. "Those pieces are beautiful. Are they family heirlooms?" James followed her gaze and smiled. "Actually, those were gifts from Joe Chino, an elder from the Mescalero reservation. He and my father were friends for over 30 years. Joe taught my dad a lot about reading the land and the weather patterns. Some of the best advice I ever got about ranching came from Joe. Joe Chino is my great-uncle," Sarah said, surprised. "My grandmother's brother." They looked at each other in amazement, both recognizing the strange coincidence that had brought them together. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. It was as if the threads of their lives had been woven together long before they ever met. "Your great-uncle is a remarkable man," James said. "He used to bring his grandson out here to help with the cattle sometimes. The boy was about your age, I think, good with horses." "That would be my cousin Michael," Sarah said. "He's always talked about a rancher who taught him about cattle and horses, but I never made the connection." They continued talking late into the evening, sharing stories about their families, their work, and their connection to the land. Sarah learned that James had inherited the ranch from his father, who had died of a heart attack 3 years ago. The ranch was struggling financially, and James had been working alone, trying to keep it afloat while dealing with drought, debt, and the isolation of rural life. "It's been hard," James admitted. "Some days I wonder if I should just sell the place and move to town. But this land has been in my family for 4 generations. It feels like giving up on everything my father and grandfather built." Sarah could hear the pain in his voice, and she found herself wanting to help somehow. What would it take to make the ranch profitable again? "Rain, mostly," James said with a rueful smile, "and about $50,000 to improve the water systems and buy more cattle, neither of which I'm likely to get anytime soon." "Have you looked into any of the agricultural programs available to ranchers?" "There are grants and low-interest loans, especially for sustainable ranching practices." James shook his head. "I've been so focused on just keeping my head above water that I haven't had time to research those options. And honestly, I'm not great with paperwork and applications. I might be able to help with that, Sarah said. Part of my work involves connecting people with resources and programs. It's not exactly my specialty, but I know people who work in agricultural development. They talked until nearly midnight, and Sarah found herself more comfortable than she had been in months. There was something about James that put her at ease, his quiet strength, his genuine interest in her work, and the way he seemed to really listen when she spoke. I should probably get going, Sarah said finally, though she was reluctant to leave. I need to get back to town and let my family know I'm okay. You're welcome to stay the night, James said. There's a guest room upstairs, and you're probably too tired to drive safely anyway. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. If you don't mind, I'd like that. It's been a long day. James showed her to the guest room, which was simple but comfortable, with a handmade quilt on the bed and a window that looked out over the ranch. There are extra blankets in the closet if you get cold, and help yourself to anything you need. James, Sarah said, as he was about to leave, I don't know how to thank you for what you did today. You saved my life. You don't need to thank me, James replied. I'm just glad I was there when you needed help. After he left, Sarah sat on the bed and looked out at the stars shining over the ranch. She thought about the events of the death, discovery of the spring, the terror of being trapped, and the unexpected rescue that had brought her to this place. But more than that, she thought about the man who had risked his life to save her, and the strange sense of connection she felt to him. Downstairs, James sat by the dying fire, thinking about the woman sleeping in his guest room. It had been years since he'd had a real conversation with anyone, and he found himself reluctant to see her leave. There was something about Sarah that intrigued him, her intelligence, her passion for her work, and the way she seemed to understand the connection between people and the land. For the first time in months, the ranch house didn't feel quite so empty, and James found himself wondering what it would be like to have someone to share the daily rhythms of ranch life. But he pushed the thought away, reminding himself that Sarah had her own life and her own work. Tomorrow, she would return to town, and he would go back to his solitary existence. But as he climbed the stairs to his own bedroom, James couldn't shake the feeling that something important had changed. The woman sleeping in his guest room had brought more than just conversation to his house. She had brought the possibility of something he had almost forgotten how to hope for. New beginning. And Sarah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then she remembered where she was and why. Sunlight streamed through the window, revealing a landscape that looked entirely different in daylight than it had in the storm and darkness of the night before. She could smell coffee and bacon cooking downstairs, and she realized that James was already up and working. When she made her way to the kitchen, she found him standing at the stove, dressed in work clothes and boots, his hair still damp from washing. "Good morning," he said, turning to smile at her. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Sarah admitted. "What time is it?" "About 7. I've been up since 5. Cattle don't take weekends off." James poured her a cup of coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing for hours. "I made breakfast, if you're hungry." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. "You didn't have to do that. I should probably get out of your way so you can get to work." "No hurry," James said, setting a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast in front of her. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Sarah looked at him curiously as she began to eat. The breakfast was simple but perfectly cooked, and she realized that she was hungrier than she had thought. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," James continued, "about the agricultural programs and grants. I know you offered to help, but I don't want to impose on you. You've got your own work to do." "It wouldn't be an imposition," Sarah said. "Actually, I think it might be exactly what I need." James raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Sarah set down her fork and looked at him seriously. "I've been feeling stuck lately. My work at the reservation is important, but I feel like I'm not making the kind of difference I want to make. I document sites and stories, but I don't feel like I'm helping people in a concrete way." "Your work is important," James said. "Preserving culture and history matters." "It does," Sarah agreed. "But I think I want to do more. I want to help people find ways to stay connected to the land, while also making a living from it. Sustainable ranching, traditional ecological knowledge, programs that help people like you keep their family land. That's the kind of work that excites me." They looked at each other across the table, both sensing that they were talking about more than just grant applications and agricultural programs. "What are you suggesting?" James asked. "I'm suggesting that maybe we help each other," Sarah said. "You need help with the business side of ranching, and I need experience with real-world applications of sustainable agriculture. Maybe we could work together on getting your ranch back on solid ground." James was quiet for a long moment, considering her proposal. "What would that look like?" "I don't know exactly," Sarah admitted. "But I could help you research and apply for programs. Maybe spend some time here learning about ranching operations. In exchange, you could teach me about the practical side of land management. And if we're successful, maybe we could develop a model that could help other struggling ranchers." The idea was appealing to James, but he was also cautious. "Sarah, I appreciate the offer, but I want to be honest with you. This ranch is barely hanging on. I can't afford to pay you, and there's no guarantee that any of this will work." "I'm not asking for money," Sarah said. "I'm asking for a chance to do something meaningful. And I think you might be my best chance to do that." James studied her face, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "Are you sure about this? It would mean spending a lot of time out here, away from town and your family." "I'm sure," Sarah said, though she wasn't entirely certain what she was committing to. "At least, I'm sure enough to try." They shook hands across the kitchen table, and Sarah felt a flutter of excitement at the contact. This was either the best idea she'd ever had, or the most complicated, but she was ready to find out which. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began dividing her time between the reservation and the ranch. She helped James organize his financial records, research grant opportunities, and develop a comprehensive plan for improving the ranch's water systems and expanding the cattle operation. In return, James taught her about reading the land, understanding cattle behavior, and the countless daily tasks that kept her ranch running. Sarah discovered that she loved the physical work of ranching, the early mornings, the time spent outdoors, and the satisfaction of seeing tangible results from her efforts. She also found that she had a natural affinity for working with the cattle and horses, something that surprised and pleased James. "You're a natural," he told her one afternoon, as they watched her successfully separate a cow from the herd for medical treatment. "Joe always said that some people just understand animals." "Maybe it's genetic," Sarah said, patting the cow's neck. "My great-grandmother was known for her way with horses." Their working relationship gradually evolved into something deeper. They found themselves looking forward to their conversations over morning coffee, sharing stories about their families and their dreams for the future. Sarah began staying at the ranch more often, and James found himself planning his days around her presence. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Sarah broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "James, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Okay," James said, though he sounded cautious. "Is this just about the ranch? This partnership, I mean? Or is there something else happening here?" James was quiet for a long moment, then he turned to look at her. "You want me to be honest?" Sarah nodded. "I haven't felt this way about anyone in years," James said. "Maybe ever. When I pulled you out of that canyon, I thought I was just doing what anyone would do. But somewhere along the way, it became about more than just saving your life. It became about ... this US." Sarah felt her heart skip. "I was hoping you'd say that, but I need you to understand something," James continued. "I don't have much to offer. This ranch is my whole life, and it's a hard life. I can't promise you security or comfort or any of the things you probably deserve." "What makes you think I want security and comfort?" Sarah asked. "I want purpose. I want to wake up every morning knowing that what I'm doing matters. I want to be part of something bigger than myself. And you think you can find that here?" Sarah looked out over the ranch, at the cattle grazing in the distance, and the mountains rising beyond them. "I think I already have." 6 months later, Sarah and James stood together in the same canyon where they had first met, but this time they were not alone. They had brought a small group of agricultural specialists and tribal elders to see the spring Sarah had discovered, which had become the centerpiece of a new water conservation project. The ranch was thriving under their joint management. The grants Sarah had helped secure had funded improvements to the water systems, and the sustainable ranching practices they had implemented were attracting attention from other ranchers and agricultural organizations. More importantly, they had created a model that other struggling ranchers could follow. "You know," James said, as they watched the water bubble up from the spring, "I used to think that saving this ranch was about holding on to the past, but now, I think it's about building a future." Sarah took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and dedication. "I think you're right." As the sun set over the canyon, painting the rock walls in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah thought about the chain of events that had brought them to this moment. The storm that had nearly killed her had also been the catalyst for the most important relationship of her life. She had found not just love, but purpose and partnership in the most unexpected place. "What are you thinking about?" James asked. "I'm thinking about my grandmother," Sarah said. "She always said that the land would teach you what you needed to know if you paid attention. I guess she was right." James squeezed her hand. The best teachers usually are. As they made their way back up the canyon trail, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the storm that had changed her life. She had come to the canyon looking for her family's history, but she had found something even more valuable, a future that honored both the past and the possibilities that lay ahead. The ranch house came into view as they reached the rim, its windows glowing with warm light against the deepening sky. It was home now, in a way that Sarah had never expected when she first accepted James's offer of shelter on that stormy night. But then, the best things in life often came disguised as something else entirely, sometimes even as disaster. James had been right when he said that saving the ranch was about building a future. But it was about building the right kind of future, one that honored the land and the people who had cared for it before them. And as they walked toward the house together, Sarah knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be. If you enjoyed this incredible story of courage, love, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Like this video if Sarah and James's journey touched your heart, and let us know in the comments below, what would you have done in James's situation? Would you have risked everything to save a stranger? We share amazing real-life inspired stories every week that will make you believe in the power of human connection and the unexpected ways life can change in an instant. Subscribe now and join our community of story lovers. Your next favorite tale is just one click away.